A girl stitched the doll wrong. Now it sews back. The doll was never meant to be pretty. It lay in pieces on the attic floor, surrounded by yellowed lace, faded buttons, and thread the color of dried blood. Eliza, just 12, crouched beside the scattered remains, humming to herself in the dust-choked quiet. She didn't find the doll, it found her, tucked inside a splintered chest that hadn't been touched since her grandmother's death, wrapped in newspaper from 1962, and tied with a length of black ribbon that pulsed faintly warm in her hands. Eliza wasn't supposed to be up here. The attic was off limits, especially since the night her grandmother died, eyes open, mouth sewn shut with thick thread no one could explain. But something whispered through the vents last night. A voice not quite a voice. A lullaby that unraveled her sleep and led her, barefoot and glassy-eyed, up the creaking stairs. The doll's limbs were wrong. Its cloth hands were on backward. One button eye dangled by a thread, the other was missing. Its mouth was a dark stitch crescent, smiling too wide. Eliza didn't flinch. She threaded the needle with practiced fingers. Her own doll had burned in the fire last winter, one of the few things she cried over. Since then, she'd taken to fixing broken things, even when they begged not to be fixed. She sewed in silence. One stitch for each limb. One for the crooked mouth. She found a spare button in a rusted tin and pressed it deep into the empty socket. But her fingers hesitated at the final thread, a thick, red cord shaped like a heart. It didn't belong in any doll. Still, she pierced the fabric chest and began to stitch. The room dimmed. The attic door creaked shut, though no wind blew. And the thread pulled tighter, not just through the fabric, but against her will. Her hand moved as if yanked. Each loop sank deeper into the doll and into her. Her breath hitched. The air grew thick, metallic. When the last knot was tied, the doll blinked. Its stitched mouth opened slightly. Something wet glistened behind its grin. Eliza stumbled back. The doll sat up on its own. And then it spoke, not in words, but in the sound of thread being pulled through flesh. Eliza backed into a corner, heart thudding loud enough to drown out her own breath. The doll didn't move, at first. It just watched. Both button eyes fixed on her, unblinking. The stitched mouth twitched once. Then again. A third time, and this time it smiled. The thread she'd used began to unravel from the doll's chest, slithering along the attic floor like a red worm. Eliza whimpered as it coiled toward her bare feet, warm and slick like it was alive. She reached for the door, but it refused to budge. Behind her, the doll stood up. Not stumbled. Not flopped. Stood. Its tiny legs, stitched with uneven seams, didn't shake. It moved like it had bones. Like it remembered walking. "Stop it," Eliza whispered, the needle still clutched in her fist. "I fix you." A faint, wet squelching came from the doll's back as its seams writhed. From within, a sound like hundreds of threads being pulled through cloth echoed, over and over. And then the doll extended its tiny arm. Clutched in its hand was a needle. Not the one Eliza had used. This one was long, black, and pulsing slightly, as if stitched from something that once lived. She dropped her own needle and screamed. The doll didn't flinch. Instead, it raised its arm and pointed to the small sewing kit still open on the attic floor. The box rattled. Spools of thread spun wildly on their own, and the heart thread she'd stitched inside the doll slithered back toward her, inching up her leg like a parasite seeking home. "Make it stop," she sobbed, clawing at the door again. "I don't want this." But it wasn't her choice anymore. The doll lifted its foot and stepped forward, slow and steady. Every movement was exact, deliberate, like it was following instructions Eliza had unknowingly written into it with every stitch. From the corner of the attic, the broken radio crackled to life. A voice whispered in static, just loud enough to understand. "Wrong stitch. Wrong sole. Must be undone." The doll nodded in eerie agreement. Then it lunged. Its needle pierced the floor just inches from her hand. And when Eliza scrambled back, she saw it wasn't coming for her face or throat. It was aiming for her fingers. The ones that stitched it wrong. Eliza scrambled down the attic stairs, her breath hitching as the doll's tiny footsteps echoed behind her, deliberate and patient, never rushing. Each step it took was like the ticking of a needle against a clock face, counting down to something she didn't understand. She slammed the attic door shut and shoved a heavy box in front of it. Silence. Her fingers trembled as she looked down. Blood. Thin red lines had appeared across her palms and fingertips, like threads had been sewn under her skin while she slept. The worst part? They weren't new. The skin had healed around them, like the stitching had been done days ago, or weeks. She ran to the mirror in her room, held up her shaking hands, and saw something that made her stomach twist. The lines weren't random. They formed a symbol, a crooked circle wrapped in jagged lines. The same design that had been printed on the tag inside the doll when she first found it in the thrift store. She'd thought it was a brand mark, a name faded with time. But now she knew better. Suddenly, the sewing kit on her desk rattled. Slowly, its lid opened. Inside, the spools of thread began to unravel by themselves, looping into the same crooked symbol again and again, forming a tangled map across the floor. Eliza backed away, but froze when she saw the photograph tucked under her sewing books. It was one she didn't recognize, not one she had taken. It was a picture of her, asleep, needle in hand, and the doll lying in front of her, its chest wide open. She hadn't stitched the doll wrong. She had rebuilt it. Something had guided her fingers in the night. Her own hands had followed a pattern they didn't remember, dragging thread through flesh and cloth with uncanny precision. From behind the door, the doll scratched, tiny but relentless. Then, a whisper, clearer this time. "You stitched the soul in wrong." The attic door creaked, slowly opening on its own. No wind, no movement, just a soft sound, the hum of a lullaby one she'd never learned, but her hands began twitching to its rhythm. The doll wasn't just here to finish itself. It wanted to fix her, too. Eliza ran through the hallway, past old family portraits whose eyes seemed more alert than before, too round, too focused. The thread symbol on her palms burned, tightening like it was being pulled from the other side. She grabbed her coat and fled into the cold. Night had fallen fast. Street lights flickered, casting long, warped shadows. Her breath fogged in front of her, but there was something else in the mist, a shape, squat and limping, following at a steady pace. She didn't stop until she reached the town library, an old building with crooked columns and walls that smelled like mildew and forgotten secrets. Inside, she found the quiet comfort of dust and dim light. She needed answers. Back in the archives, flipping through brittle pages of local folklore, her hands trembled. The name on the doll's faded tag kept circling her thoughts. Kravitz and Daughters, spirit weavers since 1886. She found a section on ritual crafts. Spirit weaving. She read aloud from a crumbling page. To bind what was never meant to live, a vessel must be stitched not with thread, but intent. One error in the weave, one misstep in the soul's tethering, and the spirit will return unfinished. She flipped the page and gasped. A photograph. A girl in a worn dress, holding the same doll Eliza had in her attic. Except this photo was dated 1903. The girl's face was clawed out in ink, but scrawled beneath in red script. She stitched the heart upside down. It stitched her back inside out. Eliza's pulse quickened. Her stomach turned. That's why the doll whispered in mismatched voices. Why it moved but limped. Why her fingers twitched like they remembered stitches she never chose. She hadn't stitched it wrong. She'd stitched it incomplete. And now it was looking for balance. She turned to leave, only to find a fresh needle stabbed into her jacket pocket. Not hers. Attached was a note. Fix it. Or trade places. Behind her, a faint tapping echoed from the library aisle. She turned slowly. The doll stood beneath a reading lamp, its face stitched tighter, smile wider than ever. In its hand, it held something new. Thread. Still warm. Still wet. Eliza backed into the shadows of the library stacks, her breath ragged. The doll didn't run. It never needed to. It just watched with its sewn-on grin, needle glinting, red thread dragging behind it like a tail. She clutched the note in her fist. Fix it. Or trade places. But what did fixing it mean? She had stitched the doll for a school art project. Something harmless. Something cute. She remembered now how she hadn't followed the instructions, how she'd grown bored and shoved the heart in upside down, the arms slightly off, the head tilted too far. Just a sloppy craft. But it hadn't forgotten. The air in the library thinned, thick with the scent of old cotton and blood. Eliza's thoughts raced as she stared at the doll's mismatched eyes. One button, one black glass bead. She had stitched that eye in as a joke. A joke that now blinked. A joke that hated her. She ran again, through the aisles, up the staircase, into the librarian's craft room. Supplies were everywhere. Needles, spools of thread, fabric scraps. She slammed the door shut and locked it, shoving a chair beneath the knob. The doll scratched once on the door, then twice. Then, ask ChatGPT.